Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Marielle Mostello, and I am a first-year doctorate student here at Nazareth College studying physical therapy. This is my fourth year working at the Hickey Center as the program and social media coordinator. And our mission at the Hickey Center and the International Institute of Islamic Thought, or IIIT Chair for Interfaith Studies, is to promote understanding and appreciation of differences through education and dialogue. So we do this through seminars, student engagement events, and gatherings open to the public. The Hickey Center also prepares its students for their future by encouraging an interfaith education. This year, our focus is on how interfaith dialogue can inform and challenge the consciousness of members of the Nazareth community and the greater Rochester, New York area to stand up for racial justice in peaceful ways. This evening, we are pleased to welcome two African-American leaders from the Rochester community, Adrian Hale and Dr. Rashid Muhammad, as they bring us into a conversation about healing the racial inequalities and injustices occurring in America today. Thank you for joining us.
My name is Louise Lee, and I'm a graduate student here at Nazareth College, studying higher education student affairs administration. This is my second year working at the Hickey Center as their graduate assistant. This evening, I'm honored to welcome and introduce Adrian Hale back to the Hickey Center as an expert on racial justice issues. Adrian is from Rochester, New York, and he is the Senior Manager of Workforce/Economic Development and Education Initiatives at the Rochester Chamber of Commerce. In addition to his responsibilities at the Chamber of Commerce, he serves on several boards in the greater Rochester community, most notably as the community board member on the Democrat and Chronicles editorial board. As a United States Marine, he has made 2 combat deployments in support of Operation Enduring Freedom to Afghanistan and served with the United States Air Force Reserves. Adrian graduated from Monroe Community College with distinction in 2014 and was a recipient of the SUNY Chancellor's Award for Excellence. Upon graduating from MTC, he transferred to Yale University, where he received his Bachelor of Arts in Political Science and became a Director's Fellow at the Institution for Social and Policy Studies, with a focus on education reform and police accountability. We're very glad to have him here as one of our speakers tonight, so please join me in welcoming Adrian to the seminar.
So first off, thank you so much for that generous introduction. It's kind of disappointing that I have to speak to you guys with a very heavy heart today. I'm not sure how many people know, but it just came out today in the news that an African-American man back in the month of March was killed through asphyxiation by a cop kneeling on his knee. He was unarmed, he was naked, he was handcuffed, and there was a bag placed over his head. And so now what we've seen happening all over the country, we now know is happening in our own backyards. And this is a time where the question will be posed to Rochester on how we choose to respond to this. And it's not enough anymore, I believe, to have abstract ideas and theoretical concepts when it comes to how we produce racial equity, and yet we continue to evade the reality that we just don't offer all Americans equality of opportunity and the right to their personhood or their humanity. And this is really what I think we continuously see, and what really the battle and the fight for racial equity really is. It's the fight to be treated as a human being. You know, I always say that justice is when our institutions reflect what we all hold as universal truths, which is we are created equal, and we all deserve the right to not just self-creation and self-direction, but to become all that is within us with the capacity and ability that we were endowed with to become. And so I'm really, I can't wait to have a very frank, honest, open, and transparent conversation. I believe that it's time for us to start to not just give voice to the Black experience, but also for all Americans to suspend their judgment and to be willing to learn how not only they can become better people, but how they can become better citizens. So thank you so much for the introduction. I look forward for having a very transparent, open, and honest conversation. First off, it's no coincidence that today that we're having this conversation. It's a little bit disappointing that this has happened in our own backyard when so many of our leaders have made comments and statements that Rochester doesn't have this issue. And furthermore, that Rochester is light years ahead of other communities when it comes to the issue of racial equity. Today, we see that that's not true. My first question is, if this is the first issue or fatality that's come into light, how many other times has this happened and we just weren't aware of it as the general public? I also want to be clear that when we speak about systemic and institutional and structural racism, that we have to pull that out of an abstract idea and into a concrete reality. So when it comes to accountability, when it comes to police who are instituted to preserve and protect the peace, why don't we see that in communities of color? Why do we witness a proactive policing strategy that overly criminalize communities of color? And then me, as a workforce developer, economic developer, talent strategist, and education reform advocate, I, on the receiving end, see a whole lot of folks having been through the criminal justice system who are now afforded a lot less opportunities than they would have if they were provided the same opportunities as everyone else. The reality is, in America, place is a proxy for opportunity. So it determines the quality of education that you receive, the quality and the standard of housing that you get, and ultimately the quality of life you will enjoy. And that all has predictive powers over who you will become. I like to teach people that we need to stop blaming low-income folks, residences of challenged communities and minorities for the culture and the norms that have developed within these circumstances, and understand that these are not the causes of their conditions, but rather a response to their conditions. And so when you live in a community where you are a numerical minority, I think people don't understand that you're constantly in between two consciousness. One, where you have your authentic, genuine experience, and the other, where you have to modify that or present it in a way where the majority and hegemonic opinion can find your experience in the way that you express it to be palatable. Which is why up until the most recent events of George Floyd, you didn't even hear honest and genuine expressions from Black people about what it feels like to be Black in America. And so that's just how deep systemic racism in our country really goes, where even the accounts that we receive and the narratives that we hear are modified for palatability to the majority population. So then how do you foster or develop, the kinds of solutions that are proportionate to the size and scale of the problem? These are the kinds of impediments that people of color constantly have to run up against when trying to advocate for themselves and when trying to uplift themselves out of conditions that for so many of us, they're just born into, like myself. You heard my bio, but what you didn't hear was that I grew up extremely poor. I grew up in the most stigmatized of conditions. I had a single female Black mother. I had a father who was on and off the streets, in and out of incarceration. I seen drugs, domestic violence, all of those things I grew up in the northeast part of the city, in the 14621 zip code, which anyone who's paid attention to poverty knows that is the most at-risk zip code in the city of Rochester. So many people, life just happened. They didn't do anything but be born to the parents and into the communities that they were born in. And we have determined, the way that America is set up now, that in this kind of quasi-caste system, what you will be afforded and who you will become will be predetermined based on who you are. We have to ask ourselves, are we comfortable with that? Are we okay that for so many people, life was not a blessing, but it happened? Life happened to them. And I'll be the first to say that Black America, and I want to specifically focus on Black America as a Black man, on the day that we find out in our own backyards, a man is killed for no other reason than because of who he is. We have to determine, is that the kind of country we want to live in? Is that the kind of community that we want to live in? And for the sake of this conversation, when we talk about racial healing, how can we heal when the wound is continuously being aggravated, continuously being opened? I'll be the first to say that I recognize you cannot lead from a broken place. You cannot lead from a place of anger, but it's hard to not be angry when your only crime is being who you are. And that is what it is. So I also want to make this known. We have to stop excusing hate as ignorance. What I witnessed today in just some of the preliminary protests and some of the preliminary reactions was a hatred. And through actions, a message, an implicit message that said, stay in your place. A hierarchy that we've established in this country for all those who want to stand up and speak out and say that we need to change the way our country and our community operates. So we can't keep excusing hate as ignorance. Another thing is, when we watch those who have been disadvantaged and marginalized speak up for themselves, they're constantly met with force. When people say they want schools that work, they're met with force. They're confronted by a structure through contracts and laws and policy and resource flows that denies them what some of us demand for themselves. We have to do better as a community. We have to do better as a community. And I think that this Black Lives Matter moment, we need to make sure that things do not remain the same after this movement that is still going on. Now it has showed up at our front door. I am overwhelmed with emotion. I'm deeply disappointed. I am so angry. I'm so angry. I'm so angry. My first thought was, it's one thing when this is a national story and happening in other communities, but it's happening now in my own backyard. And I'm even more angry because at this moment, in this city, the mayor is Black, the majority of the city council is Black, the president of city council is Black, the police chief is Black, the superintendent is Black, the fire chief is Black, the school board is majority Black, and there's a Black president. And yet the conditions of Black people is not improving. We can't negate the reality, the overwhelming reality, because there are exceptions like Adrian Hale. That is unacceptable and is out of order. The reality is Adrian Hale had to confront odds he shouldn't even have been born into in America, or even more so anywhere in the world. And I've been so, focused on the state of the world. When when John Lewis's funeral was going on and I was being reminded by all of the different leaders who led during the Black freedom movement, I really began to understand that underneath the racial language, there was an implicit demand and plea for an improvement of the human condition. Judicial decisions and laws are not enough. We should want to live in a world where people don't need laws and policies to know how to treat other people.
It's just too bad some of the terrorists.
And it can't be that way. It can't be that way. And it's going to take more than just Black people. When I look back on the history in this country and I look at how we abolished slavery, when I looked at how we won people of color the right to vote, when I looked at how we won people of color the right to citizenship, women's right to vote, or even some of the labor provisions, that happened through social movements. It didn't happen through Black room deals. It didn't happen because someone in a position of authority thought it was the right thing to do. It happened because leaders forced those in positions of decision-making to make the right decision, to move America closer to its ideals and further away from this urge to in need for some people to feel more important than other people. Simply put, for some people to have to control other people. The lesser of our urges and our instincts. We have to move away from that. We have to move away from that. And it's going to take each and every one of us. We cannot do this alone. So I more so than anything, I invite you all to a meaningful conversation. I ask that when you speak to somebody of color, that you don't presume to know. Because one thing I can guarantee you, Black America doesn't need another lecture. Black America doesn't need anyone's opinion. And we don't need a tip on how to turn 2 corn husks and 3 chicken bones into a Thanksgiving dinner. We need opportunity. We need justice. We need the right to be all that we have the ability to be if unfettered, unimpeded. That's what we need. And I'm asking that people are willing to come to this fight ready to do that, ready to secure for each and every one of us the right to be. I gave a talk not that long ago in TED where I said, freedom is the right to be ... That's up to the individual. We need to be sure that our freedoms don't collide and clash against one another's, right? That no one's freedom does harm to another. And I always say, do no harm, simply put, is do not deny someone what you demand for yourself. No one has the right to do that. No one has the right to do that. And I believe the reason we see so much political and partisan gridlock today is because government has failed us. Government has failed to meet the needs of everyday people. And we have been distracted by issues that for so many of us don't even touch our everyday. We fight over things that make no difference in our everyday lives. And we ignore the things that would vastly improve the lives of so many people. And so now we're just fighting each other when in reality there are folks in control with so much power and so much influence who are really the ones who've made government work for them. And I don't believe this fever of gridlock is going to be broken until people stand up and they acknowledge the truth. And there is no compromising on someone's humanity. I don't believe in compromising humanity for the sake of working together. I don't. I'm not going to say that I deserve less to maintain a status quo that for me is also simultaneously meaning oppression. I don't believe in that. We can't work together for the sake of working together if our efforts don't produce progress. And progress has to be more than an opiate that leaves us paralyzed into the way things are. We've been told to be patient, that change takes time, but how much time? And why does anybody deserve to live in a world that denies them the fullness of opportunity and possibility? No one should have to subdue themselves to such rhetoric or a framework based on those assumptions. No one should. No one should. So this is the moment now where we have to pick up the task of today, where we have to decide and determine that these are our challenges. How do we ensure an equality of opportunity? How do we ensure a workplace and a workforce that works, where working poverty is not a conceded, inevitable point that we just think is going to exist? How do we ensure that we have the public safety tools that go beyond violence? Because the reality is policing is one tool, and the tool that they wield is violence. How do we ensure that homelessness and mental illness and poverty and all of the subsequent crimes or infractions that they produce are met with what people need and not with force? How do we do that? We need to figure it out. How do we build and bring peace to our inner city communities where wounds and grievances have now created a chaos that we just accept as norm? How do we do it? How do we offer people who think their lives don't matter a path out of hopelessness without just trying to change their behavior, but change the circumstances that they're met with? How do we do this? These are the questions that pose themselves to this generation in this time. Will we meet the challenges of today like our ancestors did before us? Like Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton did when they were told you can't vote because you're a woman? Or like Frederick Douglass and William Lloyd Garrison and the host of abolitionists did when they were told Black people aren't even human beings? Will we meet the task of today? Or will we do what we've been doing? Hiding behind the lions of the past and making wonders out of them because we don't want to do what they did now. We have a decision to make. We have a world to perfect. We have a society to fix. That challenge meets each and every one of us. No child should be born into a world where just because of who they are and where they are, they will never become all that they can be. That is the challenge that meets us today. I am heartbroken. I am overwhelmed with emotion. I am deeply disturbed. But America, Rochester, we have to take a stand for who we are now. Not tomorrow, not next month, not next year, not next decade. We have to take a stand for who we are now. Because we know that some of our countrymen don't believe in some of our most fundamental principles. They want an America unlike the one that exists, unlike the one that so many of our ancestors lived, protested, rioted, and died for. This room that exists right now doesn't exist if there weren't people before us who refused to accept what other people told them was inevitable. This hierarchy of human value, where who you are is based on the body you were born into, and what you can be, furthermore, is determined by it. We have work to do. We have work to do. So I thank you all so much for giving me the opportunity to share my thoughts at a time where I'm overwhelmed with emotion. I am heartbroken. As you can see behind me, I was a U.S. Marine for 5 years. I was a United States Airman for 3 years after that. I love my country. But it's time now that we show the world that our country loves all people back. Healing, forgiveness, honesty. That's the way forward. Put it all together, truth. We can't keep evading our realities anymore with high-minded theories and ideas. The reality is what it is. So thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Miriam Cisse, and I'm a senior here at Nazareth College, studying public health. This is my first year working at the Hickey Center as an undergraduate intern. This evening, I'm honored to welcome Dr. Rashid Muhammad to the Hickey Center as an expert in Interfaith Dialogue. Dr. Muhammad is the Director of Operation for the Volunteer Legal Service Project. Rashid has over 38 years of professional leadership experience as a military officer, engineer manager, Interfaith Commission Chair, nonprofit operation director, and community dialogue moderator. He has worked closely with several diverse constitutions in government, corporate, academy, nonprofit, interfaith, and community organization setting. Please join me in welcoming him to the seminar.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for the introduction, ma'am, and thank you for the opportunity to speak, on behalf and with my mentor, Dr. Shafiq, and my good friend and close colleague, Adrian Hale. I think that first I would offer on a personal note, due to the way my personality is, and I call it my gray and monotone personality, and somewhat dispassionate approach to things, please don't mistake that as being any less passionate or upset at the issues that we are dealing with today or over time. My remarks will be based on three premises that I would like people to consider. One, the culture, the laws, the economics, the practices, the policies, all the things that create the society that we live in are largely or totally based on white supremacy, and I will give evidence of that. The second premise is that often we talk about behaviors of individuals or groups of people having individual bias or group bias and being de facto as individual behavior. I'd like to make a very strong argument that de jure, or that enforced by the law and policies and practices, is actually constructing the racial animus, constructing the racial inequities that we are dealing with. And then the third premise is that the inequities that we are talking about, Adrian brought some of those to light, are being still constructed. It's not that they are in place and that they're dying or old, they're actively being constructed. With that, I would like to start my conversation with a series of questions, and then maybe we'll circle back towards the end of either my remarks or in the Q&A with them, or if people would like to answer them interactively right now. But on the issue of the day, I would like to ask a question, because what I would offer is that we have to have knowledge. We have to have knowledge of how we arrived at where we are today, both as a local community, as individuals, but also as a society and a country and actually the world we live in. The second step would be, if we have knowledge, we have to have an understanding of what that knowledge is. Not only how it's the nature of the reality, the ontological perspective, what counts as knowledge, who has a say in that, the epistemological approach. What's the value of that knowledge, or the axiological approach? And then how is that processed, or how do we put that into play in a methodological approach? Well, not just slinging around academic terms, but those things are important. Who gets to say what reality is? Who gets to speak? Who gets to offer the lived experience? And that are some very important premises. But let me ask a couple of questions that go right to the heart of the matter in our local community. Does anyone know the name of our police union here in Rochester? Anybody on the call?
Club. The Locust Club?
That's correct, the Locust Club. Does anyone know what a Locust Club is?
It's a billy club.
That's right. The Locust Club is a club. Locust wood is the hardest wood that you can make, and a locust club is a billy club, used traditionally to enforce the law against African Americans and other people that are disenfranchised. The name of our police union that they've chosen is chosen to name themselves after a weapon which has been historically used to disenfranchise, control, and move people into a penal system that further disenfranchises them. Symbology, words, titles, those things mean things. So why would they pick that name? That's a question I would like people to ponder upon. Does anyone know the name of our local newspaper?
Democrat and Chronicle.
Democrat and Chronicle. We go back into the 1800s, at the time that the newspaper was founded, and at the time the country was evolving, and we look at Jacksonian Democrats. Jacksonian Democrats were largely people that based their philosophy on suffrage and rights and privileges for white males only, and that was the basis of their party. Our local newspaper, and I'm not impugning anybody that works there or impugning the newspaper itself today, just to be clear, but I'm talking about a historical context and how names came to be, takes that name from a philosophy, a political party that was clearly and squarely based in disenfranchising people of color, disenfranchising women, and adding to the notion clearly of white supremacy, disenfranchising Native people, etc., in some very violent and systemic ways. The name of our local newspaper. Without asking the questions, but just relaying them, some other things that are right in front of us, but may not be obvious. We have a series of high schools that have traditionally been named in our city. Some of them, East High School, West High School, Charlotte High School, which are based on geographic locales. But we also have high schools that were named after famous people in American history. We have Monroe High School, we have Marshall High School, we have Madison High School, and Wilson High School. One may ask, why are those high schools with those names of 4 people that were from Virginia, Southerners, all of them avowed racist, and all of them having largely contributed to the construction of racial animus and racial supremacy, white supremacy in our country? Briefest clause in the Constitution, disenfranchise of African Americans in several different ways, and policies and actions. Why do we name our high school after those gentlemen? There's not a Grant High School. There's not a Lincoln High School. There's not a Roosevelt High School. What does that say symbolically about the body of knowledge and how we want to treat people? That's the type of questions that we are not framing our conversations in or understanding. But largely I would offer this, and I will have to come back to a story at the end of my remarks because Adrian and I do share a background of military service, with both of us with substantial time in the military. The things that we are seeing and understanding are not a manifestation of a mistake. They're not actions of individuals. They are created and sustained, and they have deep meaning. In Rochester, we have a very dire poverty problem. We have a very dire problem with the education system within the city. The illustration of that problem can be realized in a couple of ways. The poverty here is constructed, it's sustained, and it's severe. And if we look at cohort cities in the state, cohort cities in the United States, we rank highest in many categories, unfortunately. We see a very bifurcated community. A recent report that came out that Mr. Sean Wiegand mentioned a video the other day, where it's looking, the most racially segregated area in the country is the nexus where Penfield meets Rochester and the education system, looking at the 2 education systems. The most racially segregated area in the country, not Mississippi, not Alabama, not Georgia, Rochester, New York. When we look at how this came to be, who were the people that created this and why are they going out? What type of economic systems do we have in place that are creating and holding this problem in place today? If we take a look at who have been the leaders and the rhetoric that they have employed to create these different sets of circumstances, one may ask themselves the question, why does this continue to be, and why would people support these type of inequities if they are holding true to their values and beliefs? The broader context, which I am a very, very strong advocate of, is understanding how all this came to be in our country. If we look at 3 texts that give us great insight, Ibrahim Kendi's book, Stamped from the Beginning, Baptiste's book, The Half Has Never Been Told, and then a 3rd text that I would really offer is the Kerner Commission report from 1968. In Kendi's book, he lays out a historical context of how racial differentiation and white supremacy came to be the foundation of the country historically, and he uses several instances of historical personalities to illustrate the point. When he's talking about Stamped from the Beginning, that was a statement by Jefferson Davis, who happened to be a U.S. Senator, and then when the Civil War came, he was the President of the Confederate States of America. And in his statement, Jefferson Davis said that there's racial inferiority on the part of Black people, and that has been stamped from the beginning of our society. In Baptiste's work, The Half Has Never Been Told, he goes very into great detail about the economic construction of the modern society of the world, not just the United States, and how the cotton society and industry and economics fueled the growth of the United States, and that the sometimes historical context that we give that slavery was somehow a historical anomaly. If we look at actually what happened, slavery and the cotton system formed the economics of the United States, it formed the political parties of the United States, it led to the Civil War in the United States, it led to the downfall of Reconstruction in the United States, it led to the great migration of African Americans out of the South, which created all the situations in the northern cities, including Rochester, with great racial segregation. It led to the laws, the policies, the practices, and behaviors that all of us are dealing with right up until today, has all been created out of that system of slavery that still continues to have reach and underpinning in effect here. And again, Dr. Baptiste is a Cornell historian, and he goes into great depth with a lot of detail and evidence to back this up. I find that a lot of the conversations that we have about racism, about inequity, and frankly about healing are absent this context. They're absent the understanding. Why I also mentioned the Kerner report is because it deals with the racial riots or unrest that took place in 1968. If we were to go 50 years before that, in the time of W.E.B. Du Bois, and if we were to go 50 years before that, in the time of Frederick Douglass, if we were to circle around and come to our particular time, Frederick Douglass, W.E.B. Du Bois, Martin Luther King, and the leaders that we see today would be dealing with some of the very same problems. Yes, they would have seen progress, but the very same fundamental issues that they were dealing with in their time, each of them roughly separated by 50 years. If we take the constructs that Kendi lays out, that Baptiste lays out in great detail, we can start to see why we have these problems and how they're constructed and holding things in place. If we don't have that knowledge and that background, and we simply look at this as a de facto situation, then we will continue to go round and round about people's behavior. In his book, Mr. Rothstein, he talks about the color of law, Dr. Rothstein. And these scholars have, by the way, visited Rochester. I know Kendi has been here, Stephen talked, and Dr. Rothstein has been here. The color of law. And in this treatise there, Dr. Rothstein lays out some very, very compelling evidence, again, about de jure, or being created by law. If you want to know why the inner loop is where it is in Rochester, why the expressway is where it is in Detroit, why certain neighborhoods are the way they are, where Adrian is talking about people being born into those neighborhoods with great disparities, economic disparities, health disparities that are substantially, and again, I do not want to default to hyperbole, but they're wildly inequitable. Phenomenal. There's not an adjective to really describe these things. Rothstein talks about how redlining and dividing communities was not just individual behaviors or real estate agents being bad. It had the force of law. It was created by the federal government. It was imbibed and supported by and enacted by state and local government. The racial ghettos that we see today were created, and they're being sustained through policies that not only went away, the GI Bill, which is a large motivator of people getting free education traditionally, also creating the ability to buy home, which is the chief driver of economic wealth, was absolutely denied to African American servicemen in particular. They were denied these benefits just because of racial segregation that they were rightly due. So the economy, the wealth that people have, these disparities where we see in our local community, African Americans being 3 times more likely to be unemployed, 2.5 times for the children to have health disparity. The home ownership rate for Caucasians of 73%, down in the 30th percentile for African Americans. Not through behavior of individuals, but a system that has been created and sustained. Michelle Alexander talks about the new Jim Crow. When we knock down one system of racial segregation, slavery, that goes away. Then we bring in Jim Crow, that goes away. Then we bring in the civil rights era, that goes away. Then we bring in the penal system. So these things are continually replacing themselves. And she offers a very, very compelling argument, evidence-based argument, that again, these things are being created on purpose. So to bring my remarks more into focus, some of the stories or questions that I offered at the beginning were to provoke a thought about why things are the way they are. There is a system based on white supremacy. I am not talking about individual people. I am talking about a philosophy. I'm talking about laws, policies, and constructs that bring those things to the fore. Lastly, I will close with a question. because it deals right to the subject and the times that we're living in. Does anyone know who Powhatan Beatty is? Can anyone on the call answer who Powhatan Beatty is? Silence. Does anyone on the call know who Robert E. Lee, Stonewall Jackson, and Jefferson Davis are? Anyone ever heard of those guys? Yeah, I think I get head nods from just about everybody. They've heard of Robert E. Lee, Stonewall Jackson, another Confederate general, Jefferson Davis. There are monuments, there are statues, there are clubs, there are people that fly flags in honor of these men. These men led an insurrection which tried to destroy the United States of America. If you read the Pledge of Allegiance, it stands for everything against what they believed. They absented their oaths of office. They led to a conflict which led to the death of 700,000 Americans. And all the articles of secession from all the states that seceded, from all their leaders, we are doing this to maintain slavery, and we are doing this based on the construct of white supremacy. Yet there are statues, monuments, clubs, people, philosophical construct, leaders that say this is good, this is part of our heritage, this is something that we should respect. Let me ask if any other group were to try to destroy the United States, kill 700,000 Americans, and try to enslave and deny the rights of American people and treat them as chattel, will we celebrate that if it wasn't about race? My evidence is this. Powhatan Beatty, First Sergeant Powhatan Beatty, was a former slave that joined the Union Army during the Civil War. Powhatan Beatty was in a company of men that were led to attack a Confederate position. And those of us in the military know when you're attacking a defensive position, you attack it 3 times the strength of the defenders. Well, it's just the opposite of what happened. And the 200 plus men that Powhatan Beatty was with attacked that position. Within a matter of minutes, they were reduced down to 10 or 15 people. The rest of the people in his company were either killed or injured, including the officers. Powhatan Beatty saw what happened and saw the American flag 600 yards in front of him. At 6 football fields, 600 yards in front of him. He ran through murderous fire from that defensive position simply to pick up the American flag and bring it back to his lines. When he got back alive with the American flag, he gathered the few men that were around him and re-attacked the position and successfully overcame it. And for those actions, Powhatan Beatty was given the Congressional Medal of Honor. There's no statue. There's no story. There's no textbook. There's no consciousness in our society about Powhatan Beatty, a black man who, with many others, served his country honorably to bring forward the best ideal. Yet here we are in this very hour having a national debate about traitors to our Constitution, traitors to fundamental decency and humanity, traitors to the very ideals that we enshrine and say that we hold as a society are held up for celebration. And those that honorably served, those that gave their lives, those that exemplify what we stand for are dismissed. Is there any question what the society is based on and the depth and breadth of the issues that we must deal with? With that, Dr. Shafiq, I'll turn it back over to you, and thank you for the opportunity to offer these remarks.
Even though our behavior is hypocritical and it is false, the principles in this country are actually perfect. The principles, the ideals are actually perfect. And there was a huge dispute between 2 abolitionists, Frederick Douglass being one, William Lloyd Garrison being the other. And it was actually Frederick Douglass who said to William Lloyd Garrison, look, I definitely believe in the abolition of Black people, of slaves, but I don't believe we need to rip up the Constitution and start all over again. We just need to apply it to everyone and perfect it. And so even though I totally understand what you mean by the country is based on lies and hypocrisy, I just want you to make space for, if we could actually just live up to the ideals that we proclaim, if we can put into human practice what we declared on paper, this country would be so much better than what it is right now. And last but not least, I just want to say this to folks, right? That I do understand you understanding the plight of Black people, right? But I don't want there to be the adoption of a victim mindset towards Black people. Even though we are victims of racism and oppression, we are not victims as communities. We are human beings who, if we will do the work of advancing equity, possibilities, and opportunity, then people can be able to realize who they are and what they can accomplish and become. So even though for so many folks, you are experiencing the great revelation of, the various different Americas, in this context, Black America or the Black Americas. But I don't want you to see us as victims. We don't need pity. We don't need to be looked down on. What we need is to have, frankly speaking, to borrow the language from the march last weekend, we need the knee of racism off of our necks.
Mm-hmm.
I would like to piggyback some of the things that Adrian said. Again, both of us spent considerable time in the military. I was a career military person. As a military officer, I swore to defend the Constitution and principles, not to defend a political party, not to defend a specific person, but so that those principles can be lived out. And I think across our history, as I mentioned, like with people like Powhatan and Beatty, they were the ones that stood up for those principles when they were the ones also losing the most under the system. I squarely agree. Both Reverend Cunningham and Miss Vicky brought out important points about our school district and people operating within that. What I'd like to reinforce that with is we have a state constitution, a state tax system, we have structured forces that had white flight out of the city, which created inequities. So the inequities we see in the Rochester City School District are, again, not only individuals' behavior, but a system that creates this. In terms of economics, Kodak, Bausch & Lomb, and many of the other major firms did not hire African Americans well into the 60s and in some positions well into the 1970s. That created massive wealth inequities. I mentioned the GI Bill and all these other things. So again, I would ask people to look into the systems and the structures that are creating these inequities, and it's why we see why the school district is like it is and why individuals inside that school district behave the way they do. If they come from outside the city, they teach there, they have their job. Do they have any stake in improving that community? So some very powerful comments by Reverend Cunningham and Vicky and of course Adrian. Thank you.
I want to pose a question and then give a brief response. The idea that police officers living in the community is predicated on this belief that if people can get around folks who aren't like them, that it will make them police in a much more humane and moral way. I only want to pose one question to the audience. Is based on the current criteria of becoming a police officer, the process that you have to undergo to become a police officer, and then the qualifications, do we believe that we have recruited the right kinds of people when it comes to their, personality profiles, their aptitude, their social emotional intelligence? Do we believe that we have recruited the right kind of people into the profession of policing? In addition to that, I only ask that if we look at misconduct on a spectrum, If at one end of the spectrum, you have hate, all the way at the other end of the spectrum, potentially you have ignorance. Because of the crimes you see against unarmed, innocent victims, how much of the police force operates from the portion of the spectrum closer to hate, meaning there are ideological causes for why they conduct themselves in the way in which they do, versus ignorance or a lack of training. Because here's the reality. There are communities in this country right now where you have large congregations of public workers who live in certain parts of the city. And those parts of the city, like South Buffalo, Southie Boston, have very repellent features to non-majority people. So when we propose these potential solutions, I want us to think long and hard about what assumptions are they based on, and if it's really going to solve the issue, or is it a gesture of goodwill? To your point about teaching, same thing goes for teaching, right? We know from the Coleman report to the Kerner Commission to even most recently the reports that come out of the Department of Education, both of those, Kerner Commission, the Coleman report, are federal reports that were authorized by presidents of the United States. The largest harm to a young Black kid in this country and their educational prospects and levels of attainment is what President George Bush called the soft bigotry of low expectations. And if we don't get beyond that, residency requirements, right? And I want to end with this. Please, if you hear nothing, policies are good. Resource reallocations are great. Judicial decisions are good. But people, we cannot keep going around the state and quality of the human condition. If there's one thing I hope we all remember from John Lewis's funeral, is we have to have faith in each other even when it's difficult. We can't think that we're going to solve these egregious social maladies by ignoring the human condition. Because even in 2020, like President Obama said at John Lewis's funeral, Bull Connor is gone. To your point, Dr. Muhammad, Jefferson Davis and Robert E. Lee are dead, yet these problems persist. In all of the asks we've had, whether it came out of the mouth of Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Ida B. Wells, Harriet Tubman, underneath all the feminist racial language was a demand that people do better as people. And there's no way around that.
Thoughts, and I think there might be people on the call who are involved with that work, but if you have any thoughts on the work of that group, and I guess in particular I'm wondering if you think that the approach will be effective. I'm guessing that you both have experience with similar efforts in previous years, so I think that you might know that there is a large group of pastors who've come together and are holding community forums all around Monroe County, and bringing together really diverse groups of people to give input on how we could potentially reform the police. And in the end, in the spring, we're supposed to produce a community plan. So I just wonder if you have thoughts on kind of the likelihood of success with that effort. I believe the plan is supposed to be submitted to the state in the spring.
I'll just tell you this. Much of what the public can do to rein in the behavior and subsequently like the way that the institution of policing functions, our hands are tied. There are state laws in accordance with New York State Taylor law. There are amendments to state law that allow special interest groups to have advantages when collectively bargaining against municipalities. So like if there is no agreement on a new contract and provisions and features of a new contract, the old contract stays in place, thus the problems continue to persist. That's called the Triborough Amendment. There's the collective bargaining agreement itself, and even the negotiating kind of, the negotiating, conditions, the mediators coming or the arbitrators coming in, and the arbitrators wanting to negotiate contracts in a way where they'll be asked to come back always puts the public at a disadvantage to the wishes of special interest groups. Unless we're talking about changing those levels of law and bringing public institutions within the accountability framework of the public without laws getting in the way of what people want for themselves, I have to be honest with you. The report can propose anything, but if it contradicts with what's in the contract, I mean, if it comes down to individual officers, it has to be negotiated. If it goes up against state law, we either need a waiver or some kind of exemption as a community. But again, that takes state legislature action and governor approval, right? So I just want us going back to, Dr. Muhammad, and I'm not a doctor, but thank you for the promotion. I want to go back to Dr. Muhammad's lecture. He laid out for you a legal, political, and resource interconnecting, interdependent, interacting framework that holds all these problems in place. And I can't tell you, my bookshelves are full of blue ribbon reports and commission reports for our school district and our police department. As you heard in my bio, I studied both of them at Yale. And I learned very quickly that we need to rethink the relationship between public institutions and special interest groups, to the point where special interest groups are able to negotiate terms and conditions that undermine the viability, the fiscal solvency, and the I guess you can say the function of the institution, where in effect it is inoperative, meaning it doesn't do what it's instituted to do well. Vicky made points earlier. We have a school district that is not delivering education to kids. We have I don't call it a public safety model because I think that's something different, and I think we need to redefine that. But we have a policing system that isn't protecting or defending the population it's supposed to be protecting, defending, and in addition to that, posing a threat to those people. We need to rethink those relationships. We need to rethink those relationships. And that's gonna take all of us, going back to my remarks, standing up.
Hi, Dr. Charlesworth. Thank you for an excellent question. Whether you take a post-positivist or a more of a qualitative approach to this question that you posed, will this be effective? Well, just to mirror what my friend and colleague Adrian said, is that there have been repetitive efforts, well-intended, well done, but they do not overcome these forces that are holding things in place. I would be presumptuous enough to say, if one were to read the Kerner Commission report, which is rather lengthy, and take out the years 1968, 67, and insert 2019, 2020, you could read it just as a novel is today. I'm being very, very serious about that. And one of the things that the Kerner Commission report came out with, all these things that Adrian is talking about, police unions, bargaining unions, special interest groups holding things in place. And after this report was delivered, what was the aftermath that we saw? Congress reduced funding for schools, for education, for poverty effort. They massively increased money to militarize the police, to change, started passing laws that made the penal system bigger and worse, and we elected a president that was predicated on law and order. And by the way, we're hearing a lot of those rhetorical flourishes being repeated at the current time. So unless we are attacking those root cause problems, as opposed to a community-based solution, which is well-intended, has good ideas, and could be effective, it has to be done in conjunction with the serious work of dismantling those structures. A lot of that has to take place through the legal system. A lot of that has to take place through the educational system. And again, I'd be a proponent of we have to understand what's happening and how it's constructed in order to overcome it for good for all of us. Again, I'm probably appear very boring to people, but I'm a big teddy bear. What do I mean by that? I do think that part of our principles and part of the way forward is a constructing approach, of course, based in nonviolence, but also based in the idea of trying to understand and forgiveness. One of the things about conspiratorial approaches to stuff, if we start to break it apart, sometimes those conspiracies would run counter to what the people that would be affecting them are. Sometimes they are, due to human nature, would be rather hard to pull off, which does not mean that there are not unpleasant or dishonest things going on. But I think starting with an approach of the people that we are talking about on the other side of the issue, so to speak, are people. And as bad as their behavior can be, if we take that approach and trying to treat them as people and understand and create understanding, I want you to see my humanity, and I want to see yours as well. Our leaders were duly elected. Somebody put them there. They didn't arrive there by fiat or by decree. Someone voted for them, and we have the ability to influence that. I'm not talking about any leader in particular. I'm talking about, again, we have the principles there in place, but we have people that are constructively denying those principles. So when we see things that like we see today, there's a lot of discussion around this where people will argue with me, but I say we shouldn't be surprised because it's being constructed. I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Rashid. Just adding to your point, I think there comes a time when the reality is, going back to some of the points I made in my remarks about how there are folks who the current status quo is serving their interests. And I think to Rashid's point, just bridging the two, is yes, the leaders have been elected, but the leaders have been elected by interest and powers and forces who want them to execute that. And I think we continuously see that when you see the huge disconnect from where like the community is and where these leaders are, there's a disconnect. And I think if we actually had leaders who are reflective of our values and our sentiments and our principles, you would see those same kind of opinions and that kind of shared emotions and experiences from positions of leadership. So as somebody who's young, I would say, as someone who's just sharing this moment in time with each and every one of you, I think there comes a time when people have to take responsibility for their communities, and where if the leadership that you have isn't doing the job that's necessary, you have a duty, you have an obligation, you have a responsibility to become that, right? Like Coretta Scott King had a quote that I love so much that she said, if women want to see the conscious of the country change, women need to become the conscious, right? And so like, if there are stakeholders in the community who want to see a shift in values and principle or in the very soul of a community, then they need to become that soul. And you don't do that on the sidelines asking people that are apathetic towards what you're convicted about to do that, right? Like you become that person. And I think that's the advancement between, the Black freedom movement that we've seen in the 1960s, where we oftentimes paint it as a civil rights movement, but I just want to be clear to everyone on the phone, just clarity. Civil rights was only Dr. King, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, and some affiliate groups like SNCC and CORE, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, that's SNCC, the Congress on Racial Equity, that's core. That was their motivation, right? But you had the Nation of Islam, who was calling for an all-Black state within the United States. You had Angela Davis, the Black Panthers, Stokely Carmichael, who are calling for a complete structural overhaul in the United States for communism and socialism. And so there was always a diversity of thought within the Black community. There was never a Black community. We were always Black communities. And I only ask that we treat our Black communities with the same sophistication and complexity that you would treat any other community, because we're not a monolith. There are Black conservatives who love Donald Trump, who think Trump is doing great things for Black people. They just think he speaks out of turn or doesn't say things right. And guess what? They are no less Black than I am, because Black freedom means we have the right to think and believe what we want to think and believe, like everyone else in a free country. So I just want to make that clear, right? There are many Black communities. But there's a time where we have the responsibility, obligation, and duty to take responsibility for our community by becoming those in authority and by becoming the decision makers.
Yeah, just another quick point on what Adrian says. Ibram Kendi in his books, How to Be Anti-Racist and Stand from the Beginning, goes right to that point Adrian is making, is that Black people tend to be put in this paradigm called uplift persuasion, where we have to, one, be upstanding and not, have flaws as human beings, because everything we do is reflective on all other Black people, or we're this monolith that all things. Many times I'm asked, why did this group of Black people do this, or why is this individual thinking that? As if, Adrian or I or someone else is a spokesman for all Black people, as opposed to we have the same inalienable rights to be a human being with our own independent thoughts, our own independent behaviors, and that type of stuff. But it is not viewed that way, treated that way, or constructed that way. A wonderful point, Adrian. Thank you for making it.
But from Nazareth College, I think, Patricia, we have to do that. We will have a special program for students, which we are planning very soon, how to, to create such programs, such discussion through the Hickey Center and the IIIT Chair.
Well, the question was asked maybe what a young person could do. I think Adrian have a better thing since I'm an old person. But in general, what I would offer is this, maybe just repeating myself. Arm yourself with knowledge and understanding, so when you can have conversations with people, it doesn't have to be ad hominem or attacking them. Uncle Joe, Aunt Susie, mom and dad, your brother or sister may have certain opinions, but those are grounded in knowledge that has been constructed for them generally. Start introducing facts that are dissonant to that knowledge. Don't get frustrated, and just continue that conversation. It's not going to change overnight. But when you start exposing people against facts and knowledge, then they have to start to decide in their mind, I'm going to actively deny this. But the way things have been constructed for a lot of us is to deny people those knowledge, to create those stereotypes, to reinforce them all the time through all these mechanisms. And if you work actively to arm yourself with knowledge and understanding and then move forward, I think that any effort that can be brought forward to have people have honest discussions about this, as Adrian said, frank and candid discussion in an academic atmosphere or otherwise, serves a positive benefit. And again, wherever people are on that scale, meet them there and have those conversations.
One of the things that I think young, Black kids need to see in racist environments is that they matter, and not just through what we say, but we have to show them that. I think going back to the last question, we need leaders who show them that their education is worth fighting for, that their safety and protection is worth fighting for, that their standard living conditions is worth fighting for, that a workplace and a workforce that promises a path to prosperity is worth fighting for. And they need to see that, right? Because going back to my answer to the last question, they're responsible as the next generation of continuing the fight toward perfecting this country we were all given, right? Like we are all supposed to be the stewards of this country. And even the freedoms we have, like we've seen, right? We're always just one election away from the great regression that we're seeing right now. You know, freedoms, rights, privileges being taken away from LGBT, Black, women, new Americans, and awaiting Americans. I don't even like using the word immigrant anymore because it's become derogatory. You know, we were just one election away, President Obama, to this president, to see all that taken. So we have to, you know, and I want to make this clear too. Someone asked this question, the sweetest question, and I answered it, but just in case you didn't check it yet, everyone doesn't need to be in the streets. I just want to make this clear. We all have gifts and talents. Some of us can write, some of us can speak, some of us are artists, some of us are strategists, some of us are thinkers. Like, all I'm asking is that you employ your talents, your gifts, but most importantly, your personhood, the way you live your life, the way you make decisions. You contribute them in a way that produces the world we deserve to live in right now. You all hope, patience have been paralyzing. And we're at a point now where, to use Dr. King's language, there becomes a point where delay becomes denial. And no one should have to wait for a day when they deserve what you have, you know? So, you know, just to your point, people have to know that they matter. They have to see people actively fighting and struggling on their behalf. And I was just telling my little brother, we're both Black, obviously, but I was just telling my little brother, you know, it's not like the same way as a Black man, I'm asking that of white people, right? When there's a new American or a waiting American whose rights are being threatened, we got to stand up. When there's a transgender person who is the victim of a hate crime, we have to stand up. We have to stand up because ultimately what we're doing is preserving the sanctity of our society. And the minute we stop standing up, it's gone. We've lost it. And I have news for everyone, whether you think this is your issue or not, it's eventually going to get to you. One of my favorite poems, and then I'm done. And I'm going to paraphrase it because I can't remember it verbatim, but you all are going to get the gist of it, right? First, they came for the trade unionists, but I didn't speak up because I wasn't a trade unionist. Then they came for the socialists, but I didn't speak up because I wasn't a socialist. Then they came for the communists, but I didn't speak up because I wasn't a communist. And then they came for me, and there was no one there to speak up for me. Hate knows no boundaries. It will always find a justifiable reason to oppress and control another population of people. All people. Before slavery, right? In Europe, they were fighting over how do you worship God, right? Were you Catholic? Were you Protestant? God forbid you were Muslim. What language do you speak? What place did you come from, right? Like, hate knows no bounds. It will find a way to hate you. So we don't have the option of sitting down when somebody is being threatened just for being who they are.
Thank you very much. Just another announcement. We are going to continue our next program. There are quite a few programs, by the way, at Nazareth College, by the IIIT Chair and by the Hickey Center. And we will let you know, we'll be putting it open for the public. The next one by the Hickey Center and IIIT Chair is coming with the same topic, but interfaith approach to this issue. So we will have good speakers, and that is on 16th of this month, similarly at the same time. We will be more in contact with you about these and some other programs. I think Adrian and Rashid both are role model for all of us. If you see how they were raised in Rochester, how they struggled, and how they made their way. For all of us, whether we are Black, brown, white, or whatever, how to find our way to to be successful in our life, and how to change things around in a peaceful manner through dialogue, through meeting with people. So I hope the COVID-19 is over, and Adrian and Rashid, you will be at Nazareth College with us, as you have been. Both of you have been with us again, and I hope we have the Global Citizenship Conference again, where 700 students come together. We are worried this year about it. I mean, it used to be in March, but our prayer is for COVID-19. I hope it is over soon, so we can continue our regular teaching, our regular programs, hopefully. I really admire both of you for your struggle. I know you for a while. Thank you very much for your vision, we all share that together. What you have said to that, certainly our students and us as professors, we will take it further. We are not just listeners, but we believe on practicability and reaching out to others, making others to understand the issue of racism, injustices, so that what Martin Luther King said he said that one day people will not look at my face, they will look at my heart. I hope and I believe that we will be all looking to one another as equal human beings with equal rights and justice for all. Thank you very much for your vision, sharing with all of us, and we appreciate, and hopefully we will be in contact with one another. And for the audience, thank you very much. We all appreciate you joining us, certainly quite a few of our students, quite a few from the community, and thanks to our president also being with us throughout the time. Thank you all.